All right, good. So we should be live. We are live with Real Friday. So for your benefit, Jim, what we do is on Real Fridays, how the show I think gained in popularity was we discussed real things on Fridays regarding the industry, and it started with Jeremy Potter, myself, and Brock Cassidy. Myself representing sort of an expertise within the retail mortgage banking side of the fence. Jeremy was our resident lawyer in technology, sort of entrepreneur. And Brock was and is a really enterprising CRO for a company called NewZip. So he kind of represented the real tech, fintech, side of the fence. And we just talked about the things that industry colleagues talk about at local bars or at the water cooler, and we get really to the brass tacks. And so it's often part data and analytics, market trends, commentary, but then also, we'll talk about what people have heard in the business around acquisitions or maybe some of the underlying sort of tenets. So, it's one of the longest standing shows. We've been, going at this for about 3 years. And I almost have to start with an apology that we haven't had you on the show in that 3 years. You're an industry fixture. I've looked up to you and the work that you've done for years. I've been in the business for 23 years, and you've been a pretty consistent intellectual sort of figure on the market and the trends. So I'm honored, and I love having you on the show. I think this is going to be a good one.
Well, Rick, it's a pleasure to be here, and I followed the podcast, and it, as you said, it really hits some of the issues that are germane and timely. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
So just for the audience, and I think most people might know, but there's a lot of people who may not, given that are sort of coming up, in the business. Give us just a brief history of your involvement, your work in the business, and how that enriches what you do today.
Really appreciate that. I've been the first part of my career in residential lending and mortgage banking was I started 3 OCC chartered banks that focused on residential lending, and we built each of those banks up to a pretty formidable size. And at some point, someone came along and said, we'd really like to have this. So PNC bought the first one, M&T bought the second one, and a successor, BBT, bought the third one, and that was 2011.
Yeah, BBT, best bank in town.
You bet it. So I really had a chance just to sit back and reflect, and wanted to get into the industry and do something different than originate. So I've been 25 years originating wholesale, retail, core, some specialty products, construction to perm case, and really sat back and said it would be interesting to work with both depositories as well as IMBs in the industry. And that's when Terra Verde was born. And Nalin Casanueva, myself, have been working really since 1996. We formed a company, and what we work on is really cap markets. We do some expert witness work, but we're really focusing on data, the data trends. And my background is finance and CPA, so I bring a lens to it that says, what do the numbers mean, and how can you translate that into operational knowledge and leadership knowledge? And that's what we've been doing, and we've been very honored to have a fairly large group of clients. And Nalin and I wrote our first book together. I've written 3 other ones. So that's where we are. And one of the elements that we looked at is, why does this industry have so much difficulty with consistent profitability? And that's really what I've been focusing most of my time on.
That's pretty fascinating. And I think that's the answer to that question is a complex one, but it's also, you almost don't have to overthink it either, right? The reason for variable sort of profitability in revenue is, you tell me how if I were to answer that question and we were, in line at the airport and I say to you, gosh, Jim, why is it that these mortgage companies lose money one day and they make money the next? It would seem to me that the answers would revolve around the market environment and rates, would be a heavily manual and lack of automated sort of process, a high touch process, a heavily fragmented process of a distributed vendors, and the overall process is sort of fractured. And it seemed like the fourth part would be that the business itself is so heavily fractured, where individual lenders are so focused on a particular book of business. Like you have some lenders that they love jumbo and they just focus on jumbo. You have some lenders that are A paper. They don't want to touch anything below 630, 640. And then you have some lenders who love, product that's under 630, 640. And it seems like it's so regionalized and product based than it is a mortgage, companies that offer a wide array of mortgages, and that tends to pigeonhole people's profitability in their ability to make money based on either a choice that they're making or what the sort of the market supports. Is there any base that I may have missed in that summary?
Well, I think you've touched on a lot of bases there, Rick, and certainly the industry rides the origination volume much like a tide going high and low. And the industry has not really worked on two fundamentals that I think are really the secret key for profitability. The first is, for the last 10 years and even before, almost 70% of the spend to produce a loan is people cost. And you certainly understand when you have originators in the field and direct contact with the client, that there is a human element to that. But the amount of operational people that are touching that file and the productivity of those operational people is one area of focus. The second area of focus is that the link between MLO and AE profitability is not necessarily linked to volume. It's linked to some other things. And lastly, our industry has built on its technology stack layer upon layer upon layer of point solutions that ostensibly help in one particular area. But when you peel back all those layers, some of those pieces compete with each other. So it's a complex question. And it really led to some research that I think we'll get to in a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. Having come from the software side of things, I mean, I started in mortgage and origination really in the 90s when my father owned a mortgage company. I was a high school 91 grad, and then my undergrad was 95, and then grad school 2000 and 2015 when I got my doctorate in finance. What was interesting to me was when you're a software innovator and you're trying, and this is true with a lot of the AI platforms, once you have a point of entry within a specific technology and you start selling at a certain price point for that particular technology, you're serving a specific niche, right? In order to justify increased cost to the lender, you have to expand your feature functionality, your scope of work, or your scope of contribution in order to justify increasing your cost, right? So then I was talking to an AI voice lender, one of the best in the business yesterday. And what was interesting was the question was, well, where else do they go now that they have an AI voice deployment to it was a company called Flare Labs out of Stanford University, and they're like, great, we can deploy this agent for sales purposes, for call center purposes, for retention purposes, and past client, past closed loan or past prospect sort of touch points, that kind of thing. They wanted to go into the POS space, because in that way, instead of doing a written POS like a la Blend or Simple Nexus or whatever, doing sort of a voice triggered POS where instead of a screen that you're looking at, the consumer's filling out things, it's just a series of questions that through the AI, collecting the information, aggregating it, and then pre-populating kind of this pre-application on the back end. And so if that the that and then it gets into authentications. Jim, can I, what bank do you work with? Bank of America. Oh, Bank of America. That's great. Do we have permission to be able to pull maybe your bank statements? Because that could give us the best chance of determining your eligibility. Is that okay, Jim? Yeah, go ahead. Pulls it. It's using Plaid in the back end, pulls, the bank statements. And it's so all of a sudden what started to be just basically a voice AI agent, all of a sudden is a POS. All of a sudden is in essence, a lead capture form that a loan officer could use in working with their consumer. All of a sudden is a verification of employment, verification of income, verification of deposits solution. All of a sudden, so with this one agent, within a few iterations, all of a sudden it's competing across 3 or 4 different existing stacks who are also trying to do the same thing. But in along with that, the functionality increase is the cost increase. So you get this blurred stack like you were talking about.
I think that's a really interesting observation, because the speed that agentic AI can move across the boundaries of the traditional breaks in the mortgage banking process. If you think of milestone-driven lenders that have a serial process that moves through there, what you just described in that agentic agent could ultimately take the process the whole way through and literally have a loan officer relationship manager simply guiding it. Because the underwriting, you can ingest the guides, you can ingest literally all the rules, and the speed and the power that some of these agentic models have is, simply astounding. It's just astounding.
Well, Better had just released their 47-second, I'm assuming application to approval or through underwriting approval sort of process, and for most of the loans you kind of can see that, right? For any loan that's 700 FICO and above that has an LTV 80% or better LTV, or a DTI of under 30%. It seems like those types of scenarios should almost be that fast. I mean, I have 7 kids, and if my kids can get sign up for a $250,000 student loan in about as much time, I don't know why they couldn't have streamlined this process in the way that and it's not quite as simple as that, but from the standpoint of just common sense, it strikes me that that for most of the files, it's going to be fairly, accelerated. But then you get into, if the average consumer's FICO is 645, and you have a bulk of eligible consumers, probably a third of them or more that are renting, that could be eligible for a loan, but they don't know, A, or B, they're in that 610, 615, 620, 625 FICO. Where there are solutions for those people, but they're not getting to somehow that message isn't getting through to those consumers. It just seems to me that it's there's going to be a huge population of, if the focus is just speed to underwrite, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to get left behind.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that 47-second number generated a fair amount of back and forth in newsletters and just posts. And my proposition on thinking on that is, sure, it's possible to do that with 47 seconds, and agentic AI can likely do that. But the issue in any file is that getting the data set to the point that it's underwritable is where a very large amount of energy goes. And if you think about, and I've talked to my friends at ICE on this, they're building a system that essentially contemplates there'll be 10, 12, 20 versions of that loan during the process. And I understand using current practice why that is, But as you mentioned, if you go to Plaid and you get direct source data, or you get direct source data from any form, that reduces the amount of touch labor immensely, and it creates the provenance of that data. So you don't necessarily have to go back and re-verify things. My sense would be what you talked about coming out of the Stanford team is really the future of how we can essentially improve the productivity in the industry. It's not the underwrite. It's getting to the point that the data is verified to do the underwrite, because the underwrite is pretty straightforward. It's interpreting the data and the dirtiness of the data and the conflicts within the data and the continual updates of new information that come in that essentially elongate the process. And Better's been working on this for a long time, but when you look at their numbers and pull their 10Ks and 10Qs, it's a really big cost lift to get to where they're at. I mean, their cost to originate is north of $20,000 alone.
So there's so many conflicting messages with that, because in my head, I'm here as we're talking, right? I'm thinking, okay, so is AI the great equalizer between small lenders and big lenders on being able to drive that cost to produce down, right? And then in that same sentence, in that same thought process, we're talking about Better is a top, is in there's about 190 or so non-depository lenders that did $1 billion a year or more, right? And they're in that 190, they're probably in the top, maybe 75, maybe 65, and so that all of a sudden the conversation around, okay, Advantage, big lender, and then you just swung to the fact that Advantage, big lender is now $20,000 to close a loan. Advantage, small lender, right? Because not everybody has that kind of cash to burn, right? So my question is, do you mind if I put that one slide up that we were talking about earlier?
No, absolutely.
Right. So my question is, as we look at this, and this is one of the reasons, this is probably number one, it's a genius slide highlighting the profitability, how much more profitable, more efficient, how much more money the top lenders make versus the bottom IMBs, right? But it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because the top IMBs, either in relation to the amount of money that they are making, even though it's a sizable amount of investment to build these AI solutions, they're still substantially profitable through servicing and other sort of revenue streams that's really tilting the scales in their direction. Or I mean, how do you explain with what you just said? Better is at $20,000 a close on. I would, and I love the guys at Better. I think they're the future of the business in a lot of ways, and I've told that to Vishal and his team on numerous occasions. But at the same time, burning 20 grand, to close a single loan, how is that sustainable, right? And because it's certainly not sustainable for everybody else who doesn't have that kind of money to burn to actually make those kinds of investments. So which is it, right? The big company that's losing, that has a really high per closed loan spend, but somehow is making more money, or the small lender that doesn't have as much, but at the same time, the opportunity for the small lender to make that substantial gains through an impactful AI solution, does that give the small lender kind of an advantage? Like, which is it?
I think, Rick, you just hit the question absolutely on the head, because I've had people in the last 45 days call up and say, hey, what's the minimum size to be profitable? Is it 2 billion? Is it 500 million? Is it 10 billion? What is it? And as we looked at the numbers, and I just talked to this chart for a second, when I first saw this chart, it was the chart of the week that MBA pushed out in late November of 25. And it came out, and I looked at it, and it just kind of registered, but it didn't register. And I thought, I got to thinking about it. And it then created a question in my mind that really said, how is it that the top tier lenders earned 139 basis points in the third quarter of 25, and the bottom tier lost 70, and the middle was 33, and we celebrated 33 because it's the first time that we've been above 30 basis points in a very long time. So the question then comes in, what are the aspects, or what are the nature of how this happens? So we went through and we looked at the top line. What's gain on sale among all these different cohorts? And as you'd expect, because mortgage is a commodity and it's pretty competitive, that 200 basis points performance gap was only about 15 basis points related to the top line. Meaning that if you wanted to say what caused that gap, how much of it was revenue and how much of it was cost? And the answer was most of it's cost. And you begin to ask, well, why can there be a 185 basis point cost differential between the top tier and the bottom tier? And one of the most interesting elements is, as we look through the lenders we work with, some of the lenders that do less than $500 million have been consistently profitable and are very close to that 100 basis point, 130 basis points. And you go, how is that possible? And the answer is they manage the living daylights out of their costs. And secondly, they tend to be very focused on what they're really good at. The lender I just mentioned is really good at Govy and really good at the markets that are second tier, meaning not central cities.
Yeah. Can you highlight who that lender is? I mean, I don't want to put you in a bad spot either.
Yeah, I can't because it's confidential. But
got it. Okay, I wouldn't want to ask you that, but yeah, I mean, product mix is everything when it comes to something like that, right? And if you can really push your gross revenue in the 350s or higher because of FHA and USDA and VA, after concessions, you're sitting pretty. Versus a lot of companies that are much more heavily weighted toward high bow or conventional, and then you're collecting 260, 270, 290, or in Better's case, probably 225, 205. Yeah. So it is fascinating, right? And I get irritated with those small to mid-sized lenders because they'll talk about how they know how to run a mortgage company, and I'm like, but you're not doing it at scale. And maybe that's the question. Maybe scale isn't as cracked up as what it used to be, right? Where you talk about, there was such a, I don't know, kind of the bragging right of saying, I have a retail platform, I'm in multiple states, I have scale, and maybe the bragging right is to say that screw that, I'm profitable.
I mean, you hit exactly on one of the questions that I found really interesting on, the volume versus the profitability standpoint. The lenders that are doing the 500 billion range, we have somebody that we worked with on an M&A deal, and their business mantra was, I want to make $10 million a year. And it was closely held by a small group of people.
Like net?
Net.
Okay.
And I said,
that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So
yeah, me too.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
And it came back to, well, we're focused on Govy. We're focused on certain markets. We are highly focused on the cost to originate.
Yeah.
We really have tiered our people so that every one of the people we have is top tier.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you said that business isn't scalable, and they do between 700 and $1.5 billion a year to hit that $10 billion or that $10 million target. But because it was so consistent with profitability, that was probably the high watermark in the EBITDA multiple.
That's a gold standard performance. Being able to make.
That was 3.8 times. That was 3.8 multiple on EBITDA.
Yeah.
And it was a really, really good opportunity for both parties.
Yeah.
But it came down to that focus. And as you look at where the lenders are in this top and bottom tier and the middle tier, you can say, well, size doesn't count. Well, there's some, and incidentally, this excludes servicing income. This is pure net production income.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's not in the picture here. Interestingly, the depositories are some of the low performers, and their cost to originate. You can talk to Marina Walsh at MBA or Mike. The depositories are not a low cost to originate because they have so much overhead that gets hit into the division.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I didn't know depositories were in this mix. Is it?
Yeah, bank-owned mortgage bankers. So people that have a specific line of business that is dedicated to mortgage banking are in this mix. There are some depositories in this mix.
Yeah, yeah. So that's your Waterstones and your Gulf Bank and Trust down in New Orleans, and banks, depositories that have sort of a separate mortgage banking, mortgage lending sort of environment, like Novus, Eric Egenhofer's company, Novus, great guy and great company. But that's interesting because like my rule of thumb for IMBs is that, your first 25 to 40 million a month pretty much goes to breaking even, depending upon kind of your, you'd love to be at 25, but I'd say more than likely your first $500 million, 500 million a year is basically just to cover the cost of origination, your cost of closing, underwriting, legal, IT. You're probably spending, $100,000 a month on IT and just technology related stuff. Right. And you're not very big, right? You're doing 35, 40 million a month. And you're basically just breaking even. So it's not surprise to me. I was talking to a buddy of mine, John Gwynn, who used to run AFN and now he runs a separate company based in North Carolina, ironically enough, in Raleigh. And he was saying that, like, at 80 million a month up to maybe 120 million a month, we were printing money because you pretty much, with the staff that gets you to about 60 million a month, you can stretch that existing staff to about 100 million a month without really very much. You don't need that extra layer of management. So your cost or close loan in that step function, you're kind of at that peak of the profitability before it starts to plateau out with additional technology and management and that kind of thing. And he was like, looking back, he's like, there's something to be said for, if you really gauge those plateaus correctly, there's something to be said to finding that right point, maybe 80 million a month, or maybe it's 160 million a month, 180 million a month, where you just stay consistent at those production levels and not necessarily pushing the envelope to get to 3 billion a year or 5 billion a year or 8 billion a year. Because there's so few of them, number one, that do it successfully or sustainably. And there's so few of them that actually can do it in a way where, you almost are making more money at 160 million a month than you are than doing 400 million a month on a net profitability basis,
I think that's a really astute observation. As I think back to the teams we've worked with and I'm familiar with that really focused on, I want to make X, whether it's 4 million or 10 million or whatever the number is. Or they put a stake in the ground and say, I want to make 75 basis points a month come hell or high water. And the attributes that get them to be able to do that are the productivity of their people, all of their people, operational, back office, sales. The operational or the productivity of the people is very high. And it comes in a number of ways. One you mentioned, which is you focus on one niche, like govy mix and secondary markets. Pretty easy strategy. The discipline to do it is really, really hard. But if you get that discipline, it's really important. when I wrote the second book, I interviewed about 300 people. And Rick, I asked every executive, C-level executive, tell me about your business. And almost everyone, it was all except two, answered, what do you think they said when I said, tell me about your business?
Immediately just went to production volume. Just said, we did 800 million.
We did 800 million, we did 10 billion, we did 100 billion, whatever it is, it went to that number. And my next question was, tell me what that means to profitability. And the answer was a little more nebulous. Well, we're at peer. Okay.
We're making investments.
Right, we're making investments. We're at peer. Think of what that just said. If your benchmark is peer, look at this chart in front of us. The peer, the average of all lenders was 33 basis points. If you thought peer was your benchmark, you left 100 basis points on the table of what is possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we see is, I think of the airline industry because one, I'm a pilot, and two, I've studied it. If you think of the competency of the pilots that fly, and the number of flights that are made without incident, it's remarkable that human performance can come to that level.
Oh yeah.
And I discussed that with Gary Kelly, who at the time was the CEO of Southwest. And I said, so how do you do that? And he said, well, what you have to understand is we have a very, very high standard of minimum proficiency. And it's hard to do. It's really hard to be an air transport pilot. You get check rides every 6 months. You have medicals every 6 months.
Yeah.
It all has to work. And if you fail a check ride twice in your career, you're done as an ATP with our particular company, because that's the standard of performance that we require. And I thought about that and said, how is that possible? Well, first, airline pilots are flying a lot of flights. They're flying, in the cockpit, 800 hours a year of actual flight time. So they're getting a lot of cycles, and they're measured on every aspect of it. Every flight has data pouring out of the cockpit and the engine through a system called ACARS, where that data is flashed down. And literally the people on the ground that manage that information, whether it's the chief pilot or the maintenance chief or the COO, they see deviations right away and they manage them right away. And they do not tolerate bad performance. But think about it, if a loan officer doing 1, 2, 3, 4 units a month, how can you be as proficient at that? And
that's right.
That's a question that comes up. And guess what? The answer, when you look at the revenue generated by a group of producers, whether it's AEs or whether it's mortgage loan officers or whether it's operational people, they tend to follow a chart that looks an awful lot like the Pareto principle. And the data is so consistent that it's almost scary. And would love your take on that.
So, like the data with respect to, when you say the Pareto principle, like what exactly is it mainly size versus revenue, or what metrics? What are you driving in that?
Yeah, great question. We studied a lot of lenders and a lot of the revenue curve. And what we found in most retail lenders is that about 20% of the people produce 50% of the revenue.
Oh, yeah.
And then 50% of the people produce 20% of the revenue. And the 30% in the middle produces 30% of the revenue.
Yeah.
And I have a chart on that. If you don't mind, maybe we just flip to the fourth chart.
This here?
That right there. So That's literally a picture of a cohort from one of our clients that was kind enough to let us anonymize the name. But look at what this tells you. If you wanted to think about how to coach and how to manage this business.
Yeah.
And incidentally, everybody on this chart was there at least 120 days. So there's no spin up involved. This is consistent performance. Start at the right. The last 25% of the people produce 5% of the revenue. And the last 50% of the people produce 5 plus 15 or 20% of the revenue. It's really, really hard to make money on that cohort.
Yeah.
And the real opportunity to manage, and what we see, what we see is the way that regardless of size, I mean, you have to have a minimum size, and maybe it's 300, 400, 500 billion. I don't know. It depends on your market, your business, and what you're paying people. But the opportunity to manage that middle tier and level them up.
Yeah.
The difference between breaking even and earning 100 basis points.
Yeah. It's interesting, Jim, because from a retail, from a strategy standpoint, it's hard because everybody wants those top tier LOs, right? And this is why much of us, like especially at NFM, our average LO closes 21 million a year, right? Mm-hmm. Average, right? So whereas most of our top 10 peers, the average LO might close, 7 to maybe 11 million a year, right? And because it depends on where you are in the growth trajectory. Because when you're trying to grow and you're a small to mid-sized lender, you're trying to you're getting what you're kind of getting, right? Because you don't get, most lenders will have one A player, but if you look at those outside of the even within the top 190 of non-depository lenders, but you look at all lenders, there's only about 400 lenders in the country that did $1 billion a year or more, right? If you add in the depositories, right? There's only about maybe 350, 380 lenders, right? And there's 32,000 lenders out there, right? But non-depository and depository. So every lender has that one prima donna, like the one king or queen that whose needs are well served, and oftentimes that individual holds the rest of the company hostage. But everyone else, you pretty much are recruiting B, C, and D players, and you're really hoping that. So you're kind of managing the cost because you might play those games of like, well, if you're an outside LO, there's no minimum wage draw, so you pretty much truly commission only. You can maybe make some lenders, and many of which might say, well, we'll render you part-time so we don't have to pay your health insurance costs. You start segmenting out those to try to mitigate that. But you're just trying to get the scraps from what those of us at the top 10 kind of have the money to afford to be able to pay 30 or 40 or 50, and in some cases 70 or 80 basis points on the last 12 months of volume to lock them down for 12 or 24 or 36 months in some kind of clawback kind of relationship. So those of us in the top 10, we look at it like you're building a professional sports team. And if I want Jim Deitch caliber origination, he's giving me my prize pitcher. And so I'm going to lock him down. I'm going to give him money, but I'm going to lock him down to a 3-year professional contract. Right. And there's something to be said for that, right? Because because theoretically, if we do what we're supposed to do on the lender side and delivering, good execution, good technology, and good pricing, and you as the loan officer deliver what you're supposed to, which is relationships and origination execution on volume, then it's a really good match, right? But most of the industry, and I've spent a lot of time outside of the top 20, helping companies in that 500 million a year get to $1 billion, or 800 million to about $1 billion, to what it takes to get them to 2 billion or 2.5 billion a year. And I call it, you kind of recruit who you can recruit, because momentum breeds momentum. But it really requires a very acute knowledge-based way of negotiating so that you're not constantly losing money on those people. But you don't close the door to those people, because, again, momentum breeds momentum. And as you grow, you prune the tree. So I'm always like, you go after the 50% players, you end up with the bottom 15 or 5, like according in that revenue curve.
Mm-hmm.
And then through the process of recruiting the 15 or 5, you get a 30 or 50%, people who fall in those buckets. And then you prune the tree at 5 or 15.
Right.
The problem is most lenders don't prune the tree. They don't have the sales management, the sales leadership, and the disciplined oversight to be able to. I always say you coach people up or out. Right? You either have to coach them up so those C players become B, or those C players, if they're teetering on D, then you got to coach them out. You basically say like, this isn't for you, or maybe find another lender, and you do yourself a favor by giving them to your competition.
There is so much fruit in what you just talked about. First off, this is a revenue chart, which is gain on sale plus fees collected, less lender premium, less concessions. So this is real. And if you looked at this particular lender's volume, it does not line up. The producers with the highest volume don't necessarily follow this same curve because of a variety of reasons. I think you raised a really good point, which is when you look at this last 20% of the revenue, you've got to ask yourself, what's the likelihood that they can meet that minimum performance requirement? And if not, hope and a prayer will not get you there.
Yeah. That's where sales leadership is everything. Because if you don't have it, then you really are anchoring your boat with some costs. A lot of hidden costs and that are easy to find, but they're hidden because you don't have the leadership to find it.
That is a very astute comment, because the whole idea of getting to a minimum performance standard, it goes back to the airline pilot analogy. You have to get to that minimum performance standard. That minimum performance standard means you can safely operate the aircraft and not bend or break anything consistently, regardless of weather, regardless of whatever, and you can do it. But there is a very, very strong component of skills management, sales management, call it, in managing that pilot population. And if I look at one of the key distinctions here in our industry, the point that you made, the disciplined sales management in helping to coach people and hold them to performance, is one of the things that is a major difference between that top tier lender and that bottom tier lender. And if the same names are on the bottom of this chart 2 years in a row, that tells me sales management isn't particularly effective.
Yeah.
There's another piece, and Rick, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you just as an MBA cost chart there.
Yeah.
And we wanted to talk about nuts and bolts, and maybe this is a little too nuts and bolts, but one up from that. It's that's the cost to produce a loan going back for the last, call it 12, 13 quarters.
2.5 years, yeah.
And the amazing thing to me is if you layered production volume on that, you would see that the correlation to cost per loan and production volume isn't really correlated.
Yeah.
And what it means is, coming down from the highs of 2020, third, fourth quarter, 21, first and second quarter, to some of the lows we had in 23 and 24. Your volume's been cut by 60%. The population in the industry isn't cut. And in particular, the operational staff and the MBA numbers of how many the total non-sales staff does it take to close, how many loans per person does that total operational staff do? It's like 1.5, 1.6, 1.4, et cetera. Think about that. 1.4 loans per person, non-sales. That's why that cost is so darn high.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
If any other business would go, this is just crazy.
Yeah.
So
well, that's where the opportunity AI is so powerful, is to be able to take that underwriter that normally does, 2 underwriting decisions a day, and across a 20 workday month, you got 40, 35 to 50 a month that one underwriter is doing, to be able to, bring them to 60 to 100. All of a sudden, that $90,000 salary doesn't exactly seem so bad, right? For that underwriter. But there's a company called Loyola.ai, which I did a demo of their product, and they a guy from Google and a PhD from somewhere, and they did some prototypes with some top tier lenders talking about how they improved the efficiency of processors and underwriters by 80% because of their AI workflow tool, to be able to perform certain tasks on every single file that the underwriter does in every single file, but to be able to sort of autonomize that for the underwriter and then deliver it so you can just make more decisions on more files on a daily basis, rather than all the underlying activities that are required before you make that decision or make a specific underwriting decision. And I just said to them, I said, look, let's say you're wrong. Let's say I don't believe you at 80%, improved efficiency. Shoot, if you did 40% improved efficiency, people would get excited.
Very excited.
Yeah,
we did an experiment. We've been working on a data product that my business partner, Melanie Casanova, and team have been working on, and it's agentic AI, and it looks at literally all the metrics. And instead of saying, show me a dashboard, you ask basically who's doing well and who's not doing well.
Yeah, that's right.
So we had some folks in from a pretty well-known company on one of the service side. And we're sitting in the conference room, and there's a little bit of skepticism there. And I understood the skepticism. So I asked this agentic agent, we call her Coey, whose ass should I kick today?
Yeah.
And it came back and it said, well, we don't think of physical violence that way. So I think what you're asking is, where are the biggest opportunities to increase performance? And it went through and it evaluated the whole lender's data set. And it came back with, here are the stale files that are here. Here are the 340 files that have critical data errors. Here's files that are stale that haven't progressed or been touched in the last 48 hours.
Yeah.
Here's loans that are, at that point, the market had fallen. So here's loans that are now 25 basis points or more out of the market. Here's people who haven't closed a loan in the last 30 days. Here's underwriters that haven't made more than 10 decisions in the last 30 days. And the mouths dropped of this.
Yeah.
And it just was, where do I start? And the answer is, well, you start wherever you decide to start. But that type of analysis, whether it's back end and looking at pipelines with Agenics, or it's Loyola's product or anybody else's product, the speed and the rate of ascent on the rate of climb on the capability of what Agenics can do is absolutely astounding, and the speed at which they're being deployed is absolutely astounding.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, we'll get to this slide that I put together in a second, because the two things that are emerging with the points that you've highlighted, obviously the main pressure point is the disparity between profitability on the top and the bottom, right? Mm-hmm. And pervasive throughout every company is you have this, like you said, this Pareto principle of the 80-20 rule, where there's not enough time and attention that's being placed on leveling up the bottom performers, and those are creating a cost anchor to an organization, which naturally is really crushing this number here, right? And so what I'm finding from a competitive landscape standpoint, and there's two charts I wanted to show you that actually nail this home, that I believe is creating a trajectory for the future forward. And it's something that is something that IMBs have to very much keep in mind is that of the 190 or so lenders, non-bank lenders that did $1 billion or more. Okay, there's about 28,000 non-bank lenders out there. Only 190 did $1 billion or more. That's it. Okay. 27 of those lenders are non-delegated correspondents. So you get companies like Nexa, Westcap, C2 Financial, Ease Mortgage, and they're connected to UWM, selling most of their volume. Now, they all have warehouse lines. Companies like Nexa and so on bank probably 2/3 of their loans on their own warehouse line, but it's in partnership with PennyMac or UWM or what have you. So the cost curve that you've just talked about, okay, has been removed because no underwriting, closing, funding, no back office expenses. So their cost to produce a loan is really low, right? So it removes the pressure from them to have to recruit top performers, which is why you get companies like Westcap that have 5,000 loan officers, but only about 1,800 actually produce loans, or maybe 2,000 will actually produce loans. And the rest are more sporadic, maybe once a month, once every other month, whatever it is, but they don't care, right? Because they're paying 1099 cost. They don't have a lot of the infrastructure related costs to support the W-2 employee or to support all the back office fulfillment expenses. And so as a result, in my analysis of the market the last 12 to 13 months, those 27 non-delegated lenders, in my view, has made UWM the largest retail platform in the country. Because if you add up the volume with the bulk of that going to UWM, it adds up to about $65 billion in volume, which is 10 to 15 billion more than what Cross Country did, right? Mm-hmm. And when I looked at every lender in that top 190 and their recruiting, like so if I looked at a lender, what loan officers they lost and the production impact of losing that loan officer, and what production impact they gained by the loan officers they recruited, if I added up every single lender that was part of this non-delegated cohort, they recruited over $6 billion in net positive production in the last 12 to 13 months. If I did the same thing for everyone else that was just a traditional IMB, okay, everyone else that's a traditional IMB, the net positive of loan officers they lost and loan officers they gained was only $1 billion. Mm-hmm. So it shows you the migratory route. It shows you the migratory route that these loan officers are going. And it's not just the bottom feeders, but it's the mid-sized to large producing loan officers that are being sort of attracted and migrating away. And to some degree, what the argument you're making around high cost to produce, anchored by a lot of costs associated to low producing loan officers, and the lower production volume lenders are 100 basis points off in profitability to the top producing loan officers, is what's feeding the market vacuum, which is driving the number of non-delegated correspondent platforms up. Yep. Right. And I think it's an existential threat to the IMBs, unless to non-servicer IMBs. Yep. Okay. Because, and that's why there's so much M&A activity associated to those sub 1 billion, because again, half that volume is going just to pay your bills. And you're only making money on, let's say you're at 100 million a month. You're only making money on 50 or 45 or 50 million a month in volume, which, if you're making 60 basis points on that or 50 basis points on that, great. Right. But most aren't hovering between 800 million and a billion. Most are below 800 million and below. Yeah. So you're only making money on 10, 15, 20, 25 million a month. And if you lose 2 or 3 top producers to companies like at NFM or someone else, then all of a sudden you're really destabilized, because now you're really hovering over that break-even point.
this is such a great analysis, Rick. And it's interesting when you look at UWM and what they've done on this whole non-Dell side. And one of my friends is a warehouse lender that focuses on this non-Dell segment, and they tend to be very agile, very profitable, for exactly the reasons you mentioned. They don't have all of that cost associated with everything that happens when you have to be a delegated lender and put all of that fixed cost on the back end as well as the risk. I think the other interesting thing that UWM has done, through Jason Bressler, their CTO, brilliant execution of a system that puts the guardrails up, very much like an airline such as Southwest has put the guardrails up. There's technology to prevent the pilot from doing something really bad in a moment of lapse. But the agentic work that UWM has done, their strategy of accumulating servicing now that HPPPA is in effect. That's another thing that we I just think about in terms of putting additional pressure on the non-servicing IMBs and depositories, for that matter, is the whole trigger lead change. But what you have in this chart really says that the originators who are in that middle or bottom tier self-select because they can essentially be coached and be guided with the superior technology of someone like UWM or similar. And I think it is an existential threat to the fabric of the IMB community. And it could be that the top 10, 20, 30, 40 IMBs essentially rule the roost, and everybody else is just screaming to hang on. Yeah.
Well, I think that the it's IMBs are king of the pivot, and I think that pivoting and adjusting a strategy is key. And I know at NFM, Bob's been really smart, Bob Tyson, because he has almost like a non-delegated and a delegated sort of margin strategy for our large groups, because NFM is largely made up of 5 groups, whereas most companies you might have, doing $8 billion a year or more. Most companies might have, 200 or 300 branches. We're just not that way. It's basically broken up across 5 groups. And so the way Bob has structured the company is it largely almost as UWM like, where it sections off, and it allocates sort of additional margin away from corporate, but it assigns it to the operating health of each of these large divisions in a manner where they could leverage the economy of scale and the investments of technology that corporate, i.e. could be UWM or it could be, NFM. They leverage the economy of scale, but they're really very sober about the allocated margin that is required in order for these divisions and these groups to be profitable and to be competitive, right? And it's the right balance, because I've been in some of the other large top 10 lenders who are so anchored into the branching structure where they have 300, 500, 600, 700 branches, and you're almost you're like like Game of Thrones. You're like King of the North, and you have all your peasants inside your walls, right? Those are your small to mid-sized branches, but so you create this licensing wall with a drawbridge. You can't leave, but you can't come in without passing through. And there's only a few lords, right? Whereas at NFM, the company is really run by lords. It's run by really 5 divisions working in partnership with Bob, where you have a Ryan Sandell who did $1.1 billion, $1.2 billion last year. You have a guy like Daniel Saw who did almost $900 million last year, or about $900 million last year, and those are larger than most companies. You know, we have Lindsay Poe, who's incredible in Southern California, who did, you know, 500 or 600 million last year. And she's incredible. And she's running her own company. You don't even know, you wouldn't even know that she's connected to NFM because they execute so well as a subsidiary of NFM. And I think that it's really the only type of company I've seen that is sort of structured like that dominantly, you know, as a part of its sort of nucleus, you know. But you know, it's but it's going to require lenders, and I see NFM having made that pivot, but it's going to require a lot of the distributed retail platforms to make that pivot. Otherwise, it's going to be, you know, these non-delegated. I mean, there are companies out there. This company called Ease Mortgage. I watched them 3 years ago. Came out of nowhere, and they did $1.6 billion last year. So I called this guy named Jason Stucher. I called him and I said, "You don't know who I am. I don't really know who you are. But how did you do what you did? Because I know how hard it is to do what you did. You recruited out of nowhere 400 loan officers, and how did you do it? Because you went from 0 to $1.6 billion in 3 years. You know." And he spent 15 years with Matt, built a tremendous relationship with UWM. He's got its own warehouse lines, licensing, everything else, but he leverages UWM's technology, licensing, and their fulfillment and that tight relationship to be able to deliver a good product, good service to this ecosystem of these young kids, these 20-year-old kids that are just killing it. You know, now the question of just the sustainability is something that only will be answered with time, because companies like his and others will get their kink in their armor. Like the regulatory pendulum always swings, right? But I'm so impressed with this class of lenders that are emerging, right? Because of how smart they are. But I looked at this research here to be emblematic of the research you did here between the cost per closed loan, where the production's at, the top, middle, and bottom, and then the net summary of where we started here is the top performing lenders are it's a tale of two cities, right? You have the top performing lenders are doing extraordinarily well, and you have the middle tier, which is barely hanging on, but hanging on, and you have the bottom tier, which is just getting crushed.
Yeah. It really says, to me that this 200 basis point gap ultimately is not sustainable. What has occurred is, that spike of profitability in the COVID years really pulled 5-6 years of production forward and filled the tanks of a lot of the lenders that are just dissipating the capital. And ultimately, some of the M&A activity you see, people just running out of gas going, I can't make this work and I can't afford to give any more away. But it does give rise to people who are creative and maybe don't have that historical mindset of, here's how we have to do it. We have to be a banker in order to make this work. Banker definition can be, full banker or non-del banker. And that's really an interesting sweet spot. And you see that flourishing. And I really do think the next 2 years are going to be a period of both, tremendous opportunity for people. But you've got to pivot and you've got to make some tough decisions because the market is not going to stand still. And what UF and NFM are doing and what UWM's doing and some others are really kind of taking that, finding where each constituent in here fits. It's almost like the Southwest model for pilots. You can pay a pilot a lot of money if they have the skill sets to fly large aircraft day in, day out. But if you are maybe not that same skill set, you're going to be flying commercial at a smaller airline or a charter operator. And it finds its own level because the skill sets and the ability to produce are there.
Now, are you seeing AI, the great equalizer, to this, or do you think that's going to widen the divide even further for the top versus the bottom?
I think initially it will be an equalizer, and in the end, the people that can do AI at scale in a coherent strategy, and I would put UWM in that bucket,
Yeah,
are going to find a way to do that. And I would put some of the teams and some of the strategies that you just mentioned, for instance, what NFM is doing. It's really about mindset on how you make this work in the reality of the cost structure we're at today. It's really not size. It's really not necessarily agentic AI. It's mindset of how you want to compete and how you manage those team members to make sure that you've got a winning team. And if you're in stasis and you don't do the things you mentioned, the people that don't really wean out or thin the herd of and they're not bad people, they just don't fit your particular model. But work on that bottom half. That's why your costs are going. Your top 20% are making all the money. The middle tier is breaking it even, and the bottom tier is giving it all back. And that's the theme. You've got to work on managing that bottom tier. And whether you run a dual strategy of Dow, non-Dow, whether you simply say we can't pay this anymore for this cohort, at the end of the day, I think the agenics will equalize the operational load. Leadership and thought and mindset will manage the origination strategy for that. So I think in the end, it's those two components coming together, but it's all mindset, right? You think about your CEO, that's a different mindset than most IMBs have. You think about what Matt's created at UWM, that's a different mindset.
Yeah, that's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Well, I've loved. I think this has been a masterclass of the data in the inner momentum and movement that's within the industry around some of the key, measure points and data points that we went over here today. And I appreciate the time. I think this has been one of the longer interviews that I've done, and I've really enjoyed it.
Rick, I really enjoy the conversation, and I appreciate your approach and open-mindedness and the data set and the strategic mindset you have and how you're looking at these industries. So it's been a pleasure on my part. Thank you.
Well, I look forward to seeing you. What's the next conference you're going to attend?
I'll be at ICE,
Yep.
and after that, probably chairman's at MBA and a few others. But love to catch up.
Are you going to be at the gathering?
I am.
Okay, good. Well, I'll see you at the gathering. My son's getting married the week of ICE, so unfortunately, it's going to be the first ICE / Ellie Mae / Encompass conference I haven't attended in probably 15 years. So I'll be in Tucson, Arizona that week, and then I'm speaking at the MBA New Jersey conference, and then I think shortly thereafter the Housing Wire Gathering conference in April. So we'll see you around the industry. I love your leadership, man. Keep leading. You gotta keep. You have so much experience and so many chips to cash in on to be able to help others become better leaders and run better enterprises. I love seeing you out there doing what you're doing.
Rick, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's great, and I wish you a very, very wonderful trip to Tucson when your son gets married. That sounds like a great opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's stressful, but it's great. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks. Bye now.